So we kindly received 3 questions, 3 prompts from our colleagues, thanks to Marie-Hélène and the Conference of NGOs at the Council of Europe. And their focus and emphasis was looking at the idea of victims, bad conditions for children, difficulties for the networks working as social workers, working with children, our congregation members, how difficult and challenging it may be for them, the lack of resources, but all within the contexts of the current pandemic. So each of you have reflected on the 3 questions, all relating to the pandemic. And the first one is a general one. What are the impacts of the pandemic on our NGOs' activities? I'll go to maybe Mariana. I'll start with you and then work my way back.
Thank you very much, Anne. The organization Different and Equal provide 24-hour services for victims of trafficking for their reintegration, even through shelter, but even long-term services. And during this situation of COVID-19 outbreak, we continued to provide these services. So our team have been working even in the shelter, even outside, to support victims of trafficking to cope with the challenges of this situation. So we needed, of course, to adapt some of the activities and the way how we work, but also we needed, unfortunately, even to interrupt some activities and to postpone for a later stage. We needed to adapt so to focus more on indoor activities, especially in the shelter, and to interrupt those outdoor activities. Also, we needed, because due to this situation, many business companies were closed, and many of our cases that were already reintegrated lost their jobs. So even they were doing successfully in their integration, this situation make it hard and difficult for them. So we needed to support them during this period, even through financial support or food packages or medical support, but also to support for their children. This situation, of course, affected, as I said, even the way how our team work. They needed to be trained and to have a protocol to work during this period, to have these protective measures. We needed to adapt the shifts during the night or during the day, and this was caused even due to restriction of movement that were in the government plans.
Overall, you have been adapting really well then in the context of being responsive and responsible.
Yes.
In every sense. Thank you, Mariana. I think Imelda is back with us again. There was a little bit of a glitch, not a problem. So what we did we went to plan B, Imelda. We went to each other. So we began with Mariana, but I'll go back over to you as our president, perhaps to just give us an overview in terms of the general.
Yes, I think it needs to be said that Renate is a network. And if you were to imagine the map of Europe in front of you, you would be able to zoom all over the map through to 30 countries where the membership is engaged in the action against human trafficking. So as Mariana, it's good we began with Mariana because she's a particular case of a member running a shelter. So she's given us a fantastic example of how the impact of a member can be really huge because of COVID-19. So if we were to look at the direct action of, say, in Albania with advice and service centers, or in other parts of Europe where our members are on the streets working with prostitutes, and we know the brothels are closed in the Netherlands where we have a member, and what's happening to sexual exploitation during this time. We know some traffic victims are being trapped inside those brothels and being made to work as sex workers in some of the countries of Europe. It is horrendous what our membership is picking up right across Europe for the injustice that's happening during this COVID-19. As a foundation in general, the impact has been that we've had to cancel a training that we were having on communications and advocacy and SDGs. Not so much cancel as postponed to later in the year. Also, we're having a film festival at the BAFTA venue in London. This has a competition for young people. It's gone totally online. And we hope that thousands of you listening will actually come on board and get involved in this competition. We also have gone on to webinars and for awareness raising and for advocacy. So one of our members is leading a webinar May the 7th. It's based in Ireland, but there's people from all over getting involved in this. So we hope that, again, anybody listening from Europe will log in to the MECPATH anti-trafficking awareness raising program on that day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We have an impact also in that a lot of our work is with individuals. So we will have to actually, and we are already, many members are working online, counselling and supporting with safety. Also, this is the critical thing, the poverty that has exploded around our world because of COVID-19 has really impacted many, many of our members working in the field. So they've had to shift from, say, development work, prevention work towards employment to, in fact, feeding those who are starving and giving hygiene packages out. It's as basic as that in terms of the impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Melda. Very comprehensive overview there, and the very humanness of the response. It reflects the whole founding intentions and mission of Renate itself and the networks. Thank you, Imelda. So we'll go through to Marie-Hélène, if you would like to maybe share with us.
Yes, I'll try. My point was more on the overview and the links between the states, what are the states doing or not doing for those of the most vulnerable. And the first thing is to make the victims of trafficking going into that category, because sometimes you have the poor people, and no mention of our people. So that's first thing I think we have to do, and I already did through the NGOs. Okay. My last work was translating into French, but the very first is in English. Something Hope for Justice, just edit, and it's a very important and comprehensive document, and there are some key recommendations that we could take for us as Renate, I think. Survivors, for instance, should be considered within the vulnerable category in country plans and emergency responses. That was the thing I first gave to you. And there are plenty, it's very long, so it's too long to just list them. But really, it is very important because there is such a poverty, as you already said, Imelda, that plenty of people are entering this category, so survivors of trafficking will be left behind.
Okay, thank you very much, Marie-Hélène. And finally to Edina, who is based in Rome, but whose life experiences all are based and informed from Romania originally. So in a general sense, Edina, what are the impacts of the pandemic, as you can suggest, having regards to your own experiences?
Okay, I started my new ministry here in Rome at the beginning of February.
Good timing.
Incredible.
Right after I start learning a little bit Italian, we are all in a big lockdown, and my first mission here is to link people all over the world in sharing the mission So somehow the pandemic created a space where everybody feels comfortable in using platforms like Zoom, for example, to share and to link. This led to a new way of understanding how can we keep the good connections even when we can't physically meet. So in my conversation with our congregation, our family, the Mary Ward family, it has around 3,000 members. So over the last 2 weeks, I was in contact with our sisters from Romania, from India, from Nepal region. So all of these people working with this victim of trafficking expressed two issues: keeping the people in the shelters safe, as well as the staff. People have different countries have different regulations. Not everybody is in complete lockdown, and in some countries the lockdown assumes that the staff is also locked down in the shelter with the people for 2 weeks. So this led to some decisions, because some of the staff have babies at home who cannot be left for 2 weeks. So in Romania, they had to close the shelter and relocate the victims in other safe spaces and keep the contact online, or the social worker would go and evaluate what is the situation. In other parts of the world, like in Asia, for example, people observed an increase of time children spend online. And this led them into the trap of many of them in the sexual predators. So instead of having online lesson about, I don't know, history or geography, the teachers were found facing the new situation that they really need to teach both the children and the parents on how to save the internet. So from my understanding, child abuse online is increasing.
For sure.
And of course, at this point, I'm not sure how prepared the institutions who tackle these issues are. In terms of identification, the predators, as well as the group of children who have been or are in the danger of being abused. These are two major points that draw my attention with regard to aspects of human trafficking in the time of pandemic.
Great, thank you, Adina, because that is a nice segue into the second question, which asks about how our NGO, how Renate and its members adapt to this context and adapt their activities to the pandemic regulations and restrictions. And as you just alluded to, Adina, many countries, there's such a variety of observance of regulations and a variety of restrictions or not within the cross network of the 30 countries that Imelda referred to at the outset, that it would be just good to perhaps hear from each of you in relation to that second question, adapting to the context and adapting activities in relation to those restrictions and regulations. So will we begin with Mariana perhaps again, and then go to Imelda?
Thank you very much, Anne. So we try to adapt even our work on how we are conducting services now, but also on how we are keeping communication between different actors in the field, also between the team, also on how we are trying to do awareness raising for the population. So in different aspects. Regarding the provision of social services for victims of trafficking, for those that are in shelter, we have now a protocol in place. And fortunately here in Albania is approved now even by Ministry of Social Welfare. And so we are applying, and this is very good to keep safe even the beneficiaries, even the team. So all these protection measures, like disinfecting the environments and using masks, gloves, etc. And besides that, we in shelter are focused more in indoor activities and how to provide services for keeping good the mental health of the beneficiaries, but even also the health, how to keep them informed and updated about the situation. And the same we are doing for the beneficiaries that are outside of the shelter, whom live more in their homes and needs more information. So even our psychologist, our lawyer, and our doctor have provided during this time on distance the information on health aspects, counseling we provided on the phone or online for the beneficiaries, but also our lawyer has updated them about the different regulations, about all the packages that government approved now and how they can access it, these packages. And also for those that lost their jobs, we provided immediate support. And on the other hand, we are trying that they can benefit from government, but until these lengthy procedures to access the government support, we really are providing their and addressing their immediate needs and the needs of their children. We did this training for our team on how to protect themselves and the beneficiaries, but also how to adapt their work in this situation. Regarding other activities, we have supported many of the families in need, and Sister Imelda mentioned that providing food and addressing the deep poverty situation, it has been really emergency for all of us. So we responded to this emergency also because this helps in prevention of their exploitation or abuse. So, and also other issue is that we are continuously keeping updated on what is going around the world and in our country, even for the team and beneficiaries and for our co-workers and colleagues.
Okay, thank you. Such a comprehensive overview again, Mariana. Thank you so much. And you know what I'm hearing is the knee-jerk capacity to react and be responsive, as opposed to running to the background and saying, "Help! What can we do?" So congratulations, the creativity and the flexibility, which of course is the hallmark of all of the Renate networks across Europe, and we're given very fine examples from Mariana, and different and equal in Albania. Thank you, Mariana. So perhaps Imelda, would you like to follow through and add anything?
Yes, I've already mentioned a couple of ways in which our members have adapted to the crisis of COVID-19, but I'd like to focus on the membership itself, on the network, and to reflect on the manner in which we as a foundation have adapted to this crisis. We've become very aware through our reading and online Zoom meetings that there's been grave injustice in terms of human rights during this time, that the courts have not been open and the prosecutions haven't been forwarded. So, you know, justice for the victims is not being addressed, and the consequence of this, when they are released and have to find their way forward, which they shouldn't have to, but they do, they're not in fact getting justice, And re-victimization is very, 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 very possible without human rights being addressed here. The other thing is that the traffickers themselves are, if you like, changing their tactics. And we have to adapt to that. We know that there's a massive explosion, as Mariana mentioned, of online trafficking, not just with children, I'm afraid, but with sex work is going online, and even the online trafficker work for agencies, illegal labor agencies. They're in cahoots with traffickers in the field, in the salad field. So we as a Renate web network have an obligation to speak out. So we're using the communication tools we have through Twitter, through Instagram, through website, through e-bulletins to inform the network, and so on, to raise awareness of these massive issues that are hanging around us. And they're too big for us, really. The other quickie to say is that we as a network have 8 task groups, which includes law and communications. It involves the film festival, law itself, and awareness raising and advocacy. And these task groups already work. We work a lot online anyway, but this COVID-19 has impacted the agenda, I would say, of all of these task groups. And also our country groups, which are emerging in their babyhood at the moment, but they are very, very imperative to support the members, because it is a very, very difficult time for those working in the field against human trafficking. So we're trying to call forth each other to see what our pain is, what our needs are, and to try and support each other locally and regionally. Thank you.
Thank you, Melda. And maintaining that whole concept of theme of support and watching out for each other. Perhaps, Mary-Hélène, do you want to add anything more in relation to adapting to the context? And then we'll conclude going back over to Adina. So.
Yeah, I have 2 things to say. We just have shelter for victims of trafficking in Paris, as you can know. And I just wrote them to say, how are you? Because we had no news, etc. So they sent just me a short email, and it's a very difficult time for, because in France the lockdown it's very, very strong. Okay, so when they wrote, it was the 8th week of locking down, or being locked down. So it was very, very difficult, and they tried to imagine something for the staff to be, you know, for 10 days there and 10 days, etc. It was a big, big organization. And they were just afraid because some girls were coughing and having fever. So they say, oh my God, maybe they are with the COVID-19, but it was not, thank God. Okay, so it's okay for this shelter for us in France. The second thing I wanted to say is that for the conference of the NGOs, it was completely locked down too. We had a session in April. There was no session in April, and we had task groups. There were no task groups during this 8 weeks. So we have to adapt, as you said already, having Skype meetings or exchanging mails, etc. We have to adapt. It's the same.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It is. It's the same. And I presume, thank you, Mary-Hélène, and in that same vein of adaptability and continuing to be a support, is there anything additional, perhaps, Adina, that you want to add?
Well, yes, I think the pandemic challenged also the way we tackle the adaptability of traffickers to difficult situations. And a couple of days ago, I read a beautiful article from my point of view on the Interpol website with regard to a big capture of drugs done by traffickers via the food delivery system. And this, so people were acting like delivering food, but in the packages, it was kilos of drugs. So this made me think of how do these new ways of bringing women to the clients works today, because for sure it is. And we know that victims are vulnerable before the pandemic, and now they are completely exposed to not only to coronavirus, but to all sorts of other disease, because all the states focused attention on from my point of view, on statistics. And here I would like to say that I personally saw that in many NGOs, the donors were very flexible in allowing people to use money in other purposes, like, for example, providing food.
Yes.
While in different parts of Europe, where we think we are very far ahead with our way of doing finances, with our health system, people were donating money, were donating from their own savings to the public system. So this challenges again the way we understand corruption today. So,
thank you, Adina.
Thank you.
Thank you. That sense of being vigilant and open and being aware to the changes and the mutations of these traffickers, but of criminality in general, which affects those whom we serve, is probably something that keeps Renate on its toes and keeps Renate relevant to all who we serve. But it also keeps Renate, I think, within the framework of civil society, the private sector, the public sector as well, when you refer to society in general contributing, and I suppose the awareness that people have in relation to the work of the Renate members throughout their networks is a positive coming through from this terrible time. But I think one of the third question that we have got invites us to look at some recommendations on indispensable actions. I suppose all our actions are indispensable, but that incorporate the civil society sector at national, international level, and that crosses both the public and the private sector. So really collaboration in a sense. So who perhaps might like to respond to that? Shall we begin maybe with Imelda, our president, because Imelda is the person who carries all of that capacity and fluidity to and indeed the experience crossing public and private sector nationally and internationally. So Imelda, over to you.
Can I just mention a couple of things that I think one of the key areas which we need to recommend to all of these sectors is that they ensure that all victims and potential victims and vulnerable people receive economic and social aid now, and that it's prolonged for at least 6 months, so that they're not, again, as I repeat, vulnerable to being re-victimized, because without money, they're just so open to the work of the traffickers. The other thing is that I think, from what I've read, most traffickers are not able, because of the social distancing and the manner of the COVID-19's pandemic, they're not receiving cash for their crime, but they're going online with the money. So I would absolutely recommend that we follow the money, that law enforcement has not to be so distracted at this time that it's not addressing crime, which is absolutely destroying thousands. I mean, there's 40 million trafficked victims at the moment in the world. And if law enforcement and all the agencies are totally distracted by COVID-19, what's happening to these millions of vulnerable people? So law enforcement has to come on board, even to prosecution, using video conferencing. There is no reason why the processes for human rights and for justice cannot continue during this time. And I think that's all I would need to say, because I'm sure our friends here, our colleagues, have plenty more to say. Thank you.
Vital input there. Thank you, Imelda. So if I can cross over to perhaps Mariana.
Thank you.
To continue in that vein.
Yes, continuing from what Sister Imelda said, I really would like to recommend and urge the states and governments to include civil society in consultation processes for their plans to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic situation, especially in order to give us the chance to give priority to vulnerable groups. And as an anti-trafficking NGO, I would like to say that victims of trafficking should be in priority groups to be supported during this situation. Also, I would urge also to continue supporting financially the NGOs, especially those providing critical social services during this period, but also provide additional funding in order to adapt to this situation. It is needed for the adaptation. And taking into consideration that COVID-19 pandemic brought economic crisis, we are aware that the vulnerability to trafficking and exploitation is increased, so should be more focused on identification of the victims and especially in training and engaging law enforcement how to adapt to the new ways on how to identify the victims of trafficking. Also, it is very important to support the teams that are in front line through the trainings, through the protective measures and any other support that they need, even emotional support and psychological support because they have been really working hard in this very difficult situation. Thank you.
Indeed, and unprecedented, unpredictable situations that you cannot be prepared for. So, okay, thank you, Mariana. So we'll go over to Marie-Hélène and then finally to Adina. So,
yes, I think
Marie-Hélène, do you wish to add anything else?
Plenty of things has already been said. So I will just add that we are just for the moment trying to give a message to the INGOs conference of the COE. So it's very important for us to say what we say so that they hear what we are saying, okay? So I'm very grateful to Imelda and all of you to have this conference because it will, I think, answer the questions of Anna Ruka and the Conference of INGOs and will help the INGOs conference to be aware of trafficking. It's so big an issue, everything in the Council of Europe, that it's very, very difficult to just enter as vulnerable people, as a part of vulnerable people to be heard in that institution. So thank every one of you being part of that.
Thank you, Marie-Hélène, of the encouragement and the relevance of our voice being heard as well. Thank you for facilitating this. And Adina, perhaps in terms of question 3, anything additional to what Mariana and Imelda and Marie-Hélène have shared?
Yes, just a short mention of the reality that NGOs during this pandemic continued helping victims of human trafficking, continued finding new ways, and continued helping law enforcement in identification also of the victims. So my recommendation would be to continue to support the state, to support the work of NGOs and not to rely all the time on donors and donations. And secondly, to tackle the issue of online trafficking, which is increasing, and the pandemic proved that the means are already in place.
Yes.
This is why it's increasing. So we have all brilliant IT people who can find the best ways to identify and, of course, punish people who are trafficking, especially children.
Thank you, Adina. So in terms of responding to the three questions that have been presented by Anna Rourke, I think we have comprehensively and honestly and responded in the best informed way possible. Perhaps maybe in conclusion, give the final word to Imelda, our president of Renate, as we wrap up this session in relation to the pandemic and our continued work in anti-human trafficking, in being responsive. So Imelda, over to you.
Well, I'd like to thank Marie-Hélène for inviting us to do this film or whatever we call it, video. It's been such a great opportunity for us to speak out with what burns in our hearts, actually. And also thank each of our lovely colleagues in Renate for being here and presenting and sharing so wonderfully and enrichingly and deeply with the concerns that are in our hearts. I think I'd just like to say to the Council of Europe to listen to us, please, and to respond. And we'd love to hear more about what the Council of Europe will be doing to help us in our mission against human trafficking. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Imelda. So Imelda Poole, President of Renate, Mariana Meshi from Different and Equal based in Albania, Marie-Hélène Aligon, who is our representative at the CoINGO at the Council of Europe, and of course a Good Shepherd sister, and Adina Belan, who is the Congregation Jesu, who is also related to Mary Ward Loreto and based in Rome in her mission at the moment. So in conclusion, my sincere thanks to each of you and to our colleagues at the Council of Europe for including us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.